So I'm Ivor Ramsden, and for the last 25 years and more I've been involved with the Manx Aviation Military Museum. It started long before the year 2000 actually. It started in about 1994 when a group of people got together as a result of a letter to the local paper. People with an interest in military history or aviation history on the Isle of Man. I was one of them. It started, people often ask me why, but it started as a child interested in building model airfix kits, hanging them from the ceiling and throwing things at them to smash them. And I've grown up a bit since then. I build them and put them in cabinets so people can look at them. Anyway, we got together in 1994 to form a society with the aim eventually of operating a museum. We realised very quickly that we had got the wherewithal to do the museum. We'd got collectors of military, aviation memorabilia and all sorts of things. So we knew we were onto a winner then. So we started doing research on the subject. And the next few slides are going to show you really the reason why we need an aviation and military museum. Our collections policy starts in 1900, so we cover the whole of the 20th century and into the 21st century. And this photograph shows really the first significant aviation event on the Isle of Man. However, there might be some Victorian or Georgian wizard who actually flew in a an unpowered kite that we don't yet know about. You never know what's going to come out of the woodwork. But this is the first manned flight on the Isle of Man. This, as you can see, is 10th of November 1902, and it's a balloon. It's not a hot air balloon, it's a gas balloon. And if you can see bottom left of the picture, there's a sort of S-shaped snaking object leading out of the photo. And that's actually a pipe connected to the mains gas in Douglas. And that's what this thing was filled with. So you've got a thing like a hydrogen bomb planted somewhere near where the sea terminal is now. And I guess with a good bit of magnification, you could probably see that quite a few of the people watching this thing are smoking. So it's quite a miracle that there wasn't a desperate calamity. Anyway, the thing did take off and it disappeared because it was very much at the whim of the prevailing wind at the time. I think it disappeared off towards Cumbria. There were warships stationed at strategic intervals across the Irish Sea just in case it decided to deflate and come down. Luckily it didn't, and so that was the first manned flight. And we go on from the very first flights to the airline that everybody remembers, Manx Airlines. People used to love whinging about them at the time. I can remember listening to the Manning line at the lunchtime occasionally, and people were always whinging about the fares on Manx Airlines, but don't we miss them now? They were a very, very adaptable unit. I'll tell you a bit more about those later. Airfields. We've got 3 military airfields on the island. These are aerial pictures of them all. The top one is RAF Derby, which you're all familiar with, no doubt. Bottom left is RAF Andreas, which is the sort of poor relation. People don't realise it's there now because very flat land and it's not very visible from any main roads. And then bottom right, we've got Royal Naval Air Station Ronaldsway, which of course is our current airfield. So there's a lot of aviation history to go at. There's also the hush-hush stuff. This is the radar station at Scarlet. The big black lump in the middle is the main nerve centre, if you like, covered with camouflage netting to disguise it from enemy reconnaissance aircraft flying overhead. There are 2 masts on the left-hand side of the photograph. There were 4 very, very high masts around this radar station, and this picture is actually taken from one of them. It's 300 feet high. The picture was taken by an American guy who actually worked here. He was recruited by the Royal Air Force, who were trying to expand their radar capability. They advertised in America for people with amateur radio experience. And this guy applied and got the job and came here. And he took a magnificent selection of completely illegal photographs of the whole radar station. So if he'd been found up there with his camera in one hand and clinging to the mast in the other, I've no doubt he would have been locked up in the Tower of London as a spy. But thank goodness he did it, because so far as I know, these are the best pictures of radar stations anywhere in the British Isles. So we're rather lucky on that regard. The humps and bumps are still in the fields, the masts are long gone, but I am told that we have got the best preserved radar sites in the British Isles, actually on the Isle of Man. But it's not the most exciting of subjects, so I can't imagine we're ever going to get hordes of tourists coming to look at these things. We've had more than our share of tragedy, aircraft accidents on the Isle of Man. Over 400 aircraft have come to grief over the years. The first one was in 1919, and the most recent one was a poor guy who took his own life down at Port Erin on Bradder Head. More than 400 altogether and over 200 fatalities. This was quite a well-known crash in which the new commanding officer of RF Derby was flying to the Isle of Man. For some reason, we don't know why, but we assume that he was a victim of Manannan's cloak. He flew into Clagoya and was killed along with, I think, 4 other people. That was in 1953. We cover the military, well, the army, with the Manx Regiment, which was a locally raised army unit, an anti-aircraft unit. The scene here in the Egyptian or the North African desert, this really was the heyday of their military time. They shot down and damaged more enemy aircraft than any other Allied anti-aircraft unit during the course of the Second World War. And whilst there's not a lot to be proud of in war, I think that is something that we can justifiably be proud of, that a group of guys from the Isle of Man was such an efficient unit. We don't forget the, the Royal Navy, and in fact the steam packet. This is the steam packet vessel Ben McCree. She was converted into a very, very primitive aircraft carrier, not the type that you imagine these days with a long flat deck to land on or take off from. But she carried float planes and they lived in that square box on the stern. They were craned over the side into the sea and would take off on their floats to attack enemy shipping or carry out reconnaissance flights. And another first for the Isle of Man, not only do we shoot lots of aircraft down out of the sky, but the very first ship to be sunk by a torpedo from an aircraft carrier, that aircraft was launched from the Ben McCree. So another first for the Isle of Man. A lot of Manx people, being a fairly maritime kind of nation, joined the Royal Navy or the Merchant Navy. This is a pre-war picture of the aircraft carrier HMS Glorious. There were a couple of Manx men served on her, and luckily for us, one of them was a keen photographer. This is a standard Royal Navy picture, which I think was taken and sold by the dozen to various members of the crew, but it's a lovely photograph, very, very atmospheric. And we don't forget the people involved. It's all right looking at pictures of aeroplanes and pictures of ships and things, but we're a museum about people. And we get so many good comments from our visitors saying that the personal approach that we take puts us head and shoulders above most other museums. And this is a prime example. This young fella, Bill Taylor, was 21. He left the Isle of Man in 1940 to join the army. He joined the Border Regiment, an airborne unit, and he died on the 10th of July 1943 in the airborne invasion of Sicily. A tragic, tragic event, because the gliders, there were many gliders carrying these troops, they were towed behind American aircraft, and for whatever reason, people say it was cowardice, others say it was bad navigation. For whatever reason, the gliders were cast off from the aircraft quite a way out at sea rather than virtually on the over the land. A lot of them came down in the sea, and the majority of the guys on board were drowned, including little Bill, 21. What a waste. And with so many stories like that. Now, I mentioned manned flight before. The balloon was an unpowered flight. This is the first manned flight, a powered flight, I beg your pardon, on the Isle of Man. This is a chap called Claude Graham White, and he did a lot to popularise aviation all over the British Isles. And he came to Douglas in 1911 to demonstrate this thing, this flying machine. And it's wonderful. This picture's taken at Nobles Park. And if you look in the background, sort of behind the aeroplane, there's a long grey strip, and that was actually a 6-foot-high palisade of canvas sheeting, basically to keep the riffraff out. If you paid your shilling, you could go the other side of the palisade. What they hadn't realised, as soon as the aircraft was airborne, you could all see it for naught. I'm sure most of the population of Douglas took advantage of the free show, but that was indeed the first powered flight. Hall Caine Airport is the one that nobody knows about. This was a short-lived airfield near Ramsey at Close Lake, and it was the name it was given because it was operated by the sons of Hall Caine, the novelist. It disappeared into obscurity by about 1937, unfortunately, and it's still visible from the ground, the outline of the airfield. But this is one of my favourite objects because I am a great fan of Manx national heritage. You wouldn't think so with the way I go on about them, but that we're not in competition with them, believe me. That we have had some, not criticism, but some barbed comments. Amateurs can't run a museum. I forgot to explain that one. When we first mooted opening the museum, the then director, who shall be nameless, came out with this glorious quote, "Amateurs can't run a museum." Well, talk about a red rag to a bull. Anyway, yeah, it's 25 years on, I think he was wrong. And this was particularly nice because this used to be on display in the Motorcycle Museum when it was on the mountain, run by Peter Murray. And when Peter closed that museum, everything was up for sale. It was all on a website, and this was on there for £80. And I thought, we've got to have that. It's just a wonderful, unique object. So I rang Peter and I said, you know, I would like that. He said, oh, you can't have it. Oh, why? He said, Manx National Heritage came yesterday, and the actual sale started that very day when I was on the phone. He said, Manx National Heritage came yesterday, and they've had a first dibs on everything. Oh, so, okay, I went away sulking. And anyway, eventually, not 2 weeks later, I found out that M&H's accessions budget with which they buy new objects had run out. So I phoned Peter again with a piece of paper in my hand. I said, Peter, M&H is skint. Can I buy that sign? And, along with other things, and rustled a piece of paper. I said, the check's here. And we got it, so there you go. But the real icing on the cake, about 3 weeks later, a chap came into the museum clutching another one. So we have now cornered the market in AA signs pointing to Hall Caine Airport. During the 1930s, there were air races held all up and down the British Isles, and this brilliant photograph was taken at Castletown, at Ronaldsway, at the airport there. And this is some of the cream of Castletown youth hailing Hitler like mad alongside one of the Messerschmitt race planes that were involved in the, I think it was the 1938 races. I'm very pleased to say they didn't win. And then, of course, war broke out, and we had the development of RAF Derby. This is one of the Ivor Ramsden aircraft, which were the mainstay at Derby. RAF Andreas came about a couple of years later, and then the Fleet Air Arm built their own airfield at Ronaldsway. And this is quite a nice photograph from the Fleet Air Arm Museum. And this shows female ground crew loading torpedoes onto Fairey Barracuda torpedo bombers, which were the main aircraft at Ronaldsway. There is a chap in a life jacket who's probably the captain of the aircraft, and no doubt he thinks he's telling them what to do, but I'm quite convinced that the ladies knew full well what they had to do. But the population of Castletown used to be very upset by the fact that these aeroplanes were taking off and landing 24 hours a day. In 1945. They were building up to fly over to the Far East for the war against Japan. And there were indignant letters written to the local papers saying, we can't get any sleep because of these flyboys playing at aeroplanes. They seemed to forget that the country was, and the Isle of Man were at war. Anyway, they carried on flying. So they also carried on enjoying themselves. After VE Day, things started to relax somewhat at Ronaldsway, and virtually every week there were concerts held in the Camp Theatre, which is still there down at Janet's Corner. And we've got a lovely series of pictures taken in the theatre. And years ago, a tour bus pulled up at the gate of the museum, and one little old lady got off, and she came scuttling into the museum, obviously on a mission. And I thought I must talk to her before she escapes. Anyway, I got talking to her, and she had actually been stationed at Ronaldsway in 1944 through to the end of 1945. And I said, oh, I've got some pictures on the wall through here. Do you want to have a look? So we went and had a look, and she said, I was in a lot of the dance productions. I said, oh, I've got some pictures here. Anyway, she looked at the photos, and she looked very closely, and this, she's quite a short lady, and she pointed at one. It wasn't this picture, but you see the shortest lady on the left there. That's her. And she was absolutely over the moon that she found a picture of her. And she was so overjoyed that she opened her purse, and she brought all her dance cards from 1945. And she handed them over to the museum. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I mean, they did have a good time. It was, if you like, a fairly cushy number on the Isle of Man. They were well away from any combat. And there's some delightful stories, things like, some of them aren't repeatable, this one just about is. The last train from Douglas heading south to Ronaldsway was known as the Passion Wagon. I can't think why. It always used to have to stop at Port Sodrick for all the fellas to get off for a wee. They used to line up against the wall. The plants were probably well watered, but who knows. Yeah, there's some absolutely wonderful stories, and we have recorded them all. They are recorded for posterity, effectively. So in 1994, we set up this organisation, like I said earlier, to set up a museum. We didn't build the museum immediately. In the first instance, we decided we ought to put some memorial plaques around the island to various aviation accidents that have happened. This is the first one which we put on North Barule in 1995. In 1945, an American B-17 bomber flew into the side of North Barule. It was carrying ground crew, the chaps who do the maintenance on the aircraft, taking them from their airfield in England over to Northern Ireland for a few days' leave. And these guys were the lucky winners of a sweepstake on the airfield. 31 were killed, all of them were killed in the accident, and hopefully that will always remain the worst loss of life in an aviation incident on the Isle of Man. So we put this memorial on the mountain, and the vicar of Mackle, I think it was, is it David Green, was officiated. The chap in combat uniform is from the American Embassy. He, I think, was a major of American Marines. And it's quite a steep climb up to this site, as some of you may know, and we all went up there on foot, and this fella just sprinted up there and didn't even break sweat. He was phenomenally fit. So that was our first memorial. It was quickly followed by one at Ballarag near Laxey, and that's our former Lieutenant Governor Ian McFadden, ex-RAF, who did the unveiling for us. And that is in memory of 3 Royal Air Force airmen who were killed at Ballarag in an air crash early in the war. And then we come back to the start of aviation. Just to remind you of that, one of our early feats, 100 years to the day after that gas balloon was inflated, we reenacted it using a hot air balloon, which very conveniently belonged to one of our members. Now, when we suggested to him that we would like to do this at the sea terminal, he was a bit dubious because he was very conscious of that large spike sticking up above the building. So we said, well, what if we tie it to a Land Rover? And if you look close, you can see a rope attaching it to the front bumper of a Land Rover. So honour was served. The hot air balloon went up a few feet and dithered about in the air, and we actually did reenact that flight 100 years to the day, which was rather nice. No danger from gas explosions. So this is around the time then when this fella came out with that line, just to remind you. It does wind me up, that, it really does wind me. And we got this thing. We were looking for a premises. We looked at a couple which were offered to us by the government. Neither of them were much good. The one that was got to be our favourite was at Derby Haven, which is way out from anywhere really. We would never get any visitors because it's tucked away. But luckily the government surveyed it and decided the floor was going to collapse. So they said, how about this instead? And we couldn't believe it because this, if you know where the museum is, you'll know where that is. That is the original building. It's right on the main road. It's right within the airport perimeter. Couldn't be better. And that's what it looked like when we first took it on. It was rather shabby. The little section on the left was built in 1944 as the photographic darkroom for the airport, or the airfield rather. The bit on the right was a Nissen hut originally, but then it was converted into a brick building to house the airport commandant, as it was called. It's called. It sounds a bit Germanic to me, that, but he was the guy who ran the airport. In latter years, it was lived in by the airport cleaners. And we transformed it within a matter of about 9 months into that. It was hard work, but we were young then, 25 years ago. You know. The early displays were somewhat car boot salish, to say the least. We hadn't a clue, basically. It was just a case, throw things in. And I can always remember 2 of my colleagues, should I call them that, one with holding each shoulder of a naval tunic and pulling in opposite directions. I want it over here. I want it over here. It's not what you do with a museum, you know. You're supposed to look after things. They're supposed to stay at least in the same condition that they came in. But yeah, that was a sad casualty. So we did improve over the years. That is one of our better attempts, and that covers an Ivor Ramsden which crashed on Cronkney Relay in 1944. 5 guys died in that, and we name them. We didn't have pictures at that time. I've got pictures, I think, of 3 of them now. And it's always my ambition to get photographs of everybody that we possibly can. We had to extend. Within 6 months of opening the museum, we'd been inundated with new stuff from people. A lot of people thought they were getting rid of rubbish. We were just welcoming all this utter treasure. It was all Isle of Man linked. It was wonderful. And luckily, the water board were going to demolish this Nissen hut, which was up at Glencrutchery Road near the college. And remarkably, they knew about our existence and offered it to us. So we shot up there and dismantled it without the help of health and safety inspectors and things. And, although you can see somebody's got a hard hat on. But I'm happy to say there wasn't even a cut finger during the breakdown of that hut. And it went back up. Oh, it's on its way back up there. And I think that's the finished object. So it's virtually all wartime material, apart from the outer corrugated skin, which we replaced for longevity, basically. And it proved to be quite a useful addition to the museum. No sooner had we built that building that we heard that the Museum of the Manx Regiment at Tremode was going to close. It was operated by the old boys of the regiment, all of whom were in their 80s at least. And it only opened on a summer Sunday afternoon, so they didn't get a lot of visitors. They didn't publicise it. Family members used to go along and visit, but that was about it. So they decided time was come to close the doors. So we jumped in there and said, look, we've got a new building. We've got all the cabinets built. Can we take it over? And I've got to say, Brian Milcreast, who was the last commanding officer of the regiment, and he was the top man in the Old Comrades Association, he was rather reluctant to let us have it. He wanted it to go to Manx National Heritage. And everybody I spoke to said, no, it mustn't go there because it'll disappear. You know, with the best will in the world, they haven't got the space to do justice to the regiment. Anyway, Brian was eventually persuaded, and we did indeed open the Museum of the Manx Regiment at Ronaldsway. It occupies half of the new Nissen hut, and it tells a story in far more detail than they did. And it needs revamping. We opened this in 2005, and in the intervening 20 years, we've had a lot more material brought into us and a lot more personal items, so we can do a lot more personal stories of people there. Now, as well as shooting down or damaging more enemy aircraft than anybody else, the Manx Regiment has the dubious honour, it should be without doubt an honour, of shooting the first British shots of World War II. And I have researched this, and it's definitely the case. The Prime Minister came on the radio at 11:15 on the morning of the 3rd of September 1939, Sunday morning. He announced that as of 11 o'clock we're at war with Germany. Within 2 hours of that broadcast, the Manx Regiment was firing its guns. They had been mobilised about a week earlier and had been sent over to Liverpool to defend the docks on the River Mersey. So their guns were stationed on either bank of the River Mersey. Some were on top of warehouses, some were in fields. And their duty was to identify any aircraft flying over the area. If they were not identified, then their instructions were to fire a warning shot. And if there was no reaction, or if there was a belligerent reaction, they would let rip. And the regiment was equipped with Bofors guns. Now, they're a Swedish invention, a magnificent piece of equipment for the time, and they fire a 2-pound shell at a rate of 120 rounds a minute. So it's like a giant machine gun going off, and it's not a healthy place to be on the receiving end of that. So at 1:15 on the first day of the Second World War, 2 aeroplanes flew up the River Mersey from out at sea, and the instructions were that if there were more than one aeroplane, they would fly side by side with the wheels hanging down to indicate at a glance that they were friendly. But oh no, these 2 were one behind the other with the wheels up. So the Manx Regiment guys were ordered to fire 1 shot as a warning, and they did, and there was no reaction. So 3 of the guns started firing, and I think about 20 rounds were expended, upon which one of the aeroplanes started flashing an identification code letter, basically saying, "We're RAF." So, rather unfortunately, the first shots of the Second World War were fired at our own side. Luckily, they missed. And one of the chaps was heard to say, well, at least we know the guns work, because they hadn't previously fired them. And these 2 shell cases were brought home by the sergeant in charge of one of the guns, and his wife duly polished them every week, had them on the mantelpiece until she passed away. And the daughter took on the task of polishing them. And she got fed up of it, so she gave them to us, and I gave them a final ceremonial polish and sealed them into a display case. But when you think about it, of all the countless millions of pieces of ordnance that were fired in World War II by the British forces, these are among the first 2, and that is absolutely incredible. People ask, how do you put a value on this stuff? You can't. You can buy these shell cases, maybe £15 in an antique shop. But if it's the first one fired in World War II, you just can't value it. You certainly can't replace it. And we've got a tribute to Major Robert Kane, who is, let's say, 90% Manx. His parents were Manx. He was born out in Shanghai, which lets him down a little bit, but he did come back to school at King William's College, and he retired to the island after a long career in oil. So it fully justifies a place in our museum. Absolutely one of the bravest men ever in my book. People do say that his Victoria Cross was one of the hardest won, and it is a phenomenal story. His daughter Frances never knew that he'd got the Victoria Cross until after he was dead. He just didn't talk about it. He was so modest. And Frances married at one time Jeremy Clarkson, who you've probably heard of. And Clarkson, I have to say, I'm being recorded here, so I must be careful what I say. He's not my cup of tea, let's put it that way. But he did a programme on Kane, and it was brilliant. I was researching the story at the time, and I was stunned that a journalist could get it so right. He didn't make any mistakes. And his parting shot at the end of the broadcast was, "I'm proud to say this man is my father-in-law." Well, he was. It's not anymore because they got divorced. But there you go. But a very, very brave man. Back to civil aviation. Manx Airlines, the company we all used to love or hate. We've got a phenomenal amount of material from Manx Airlines. When they closed in 2002, they handed over all their archive material, literally from scribblings in a notebook done by Terry Lydiard when he was doing the initial planning, right through the 20 years of its existence to when it was bought out by British Airways. And I am planning to extend the museum, I'll tell you about that later, and improve that exhibition. We actually got ourselves an aeroplane in 2005, I think it was. This little thing used to fly between the island and Blackpool on a regular basis until it blew one of its engines up on takeoff from Ronaldsway. It circled round and safely landed, but the owners decided it wasn't cost effective to repair it. So they stripped it for usable spares and gave us the corpse, if you like. No engines, no propellers, a lot of bits missing, and certainly no interior. It was a complete empty shell. So I took it upon myself to repaint it, and that's me with hundreds of pages of the Daily Mail masking off the bits that I didn't want to paint. Now, painting an aeroplane on an airfield on the Isle of Man is not to be recommended. As we know and love, the wind or the rain on the Isle of Man are something to behold, and the summer of 2008 was a windy and rainy summer. So I used to get this thing masked up, ready to paint, and then the rain had come or the wind had come, and I had to peel it all off because if the wet had got into the paper, it would have stuck and been a mess. Anyway, it took me the whole summer, but eventually we got this. And bearing in mind this was happening only 6 years after Manx Airlines had gone, and the number of people who came into the museum, when are Manx going to start flying again? And we had to disappoint them and say that, well, actually, they're not. And then it was a busy year. We acquired this in 2008. This is a self-propelled Bofors gun, and these were used by the Manx Regiment from D-Day to the end of the war. We were phenomenally lucky to get this. At the time we got this, I knew of 3 of these in museums. We didn't know of any others. And then this one came up for sale in the Midlands. So I'd just had a back operation and I had to dispatch one of my colleagues who was a mechanic to check it over and see if it was worth having. And it was, and we bought it. We were very lucky. The Manx Lottery Trust gave us the full cost of purchase of this thing, it was only £10,000, which was actually less than the cost of a Jeep, daft as it sounds. There are now known to be about 7 of these in existence, so it is a phenomenally rare vehicle, and it's in pride of place in our museum. We had reunions at the museum, and the old guys from the regiment used to sort of climb on it and tell stories about it, some of which are tellable, but not all. Anyway, back to the air crashes. This is the remains of the worst air crash, the one that killed 31 men on North Barule. As you can see, there's only the tail. The rest of the aircraft was pulverised. There was virtually nothing identifiable. But this crash has had some good results in that we've made some good friends in America, family members of the victims. The Americans are so patriotic. They hold their war dead in such regard. We remember them once a year on the 11th of November, and then we took them away in the bottom drawer and forget about them. Not at my museum. We remember them every day. But the Americans are so patriotic and honour their people. So much so that in 2011, the crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery had been invited to attend Tynwald. I don't know why, but they came, and 4 of the 5 of them went up North Barule. They expressed a desire to go up North Barule, and the lady here is actually married to a Manx lad. And he probably told her the story of the B-17. And these are all ex-service aviators in either the American Navy or the American Air Force. And they said, we want to see this crash site and pay our respects. So we took them up to the crash site, and it was an amazing day. It was an absolutely glorious day. It couldn't have been better. And the big guy on the left, it really nearly breaks me up when I say this, but he's the guy who's walked in space. And he said it was actually remembrance. 4th of July, come on, what's it? Independence Day, yeah, thank you. It was 4th of July 2011, and we were stood up there, and the wind was blowing gently past, and he said, you know, this is the most memorable Independence Day I've ever had. Wow. Yeah, and we've met some amazing people as a result of that accident. And this is our little display of some of the artifacts that have been found there. Quite a number of personal objects have been found on this crash site. Things like wristwatches, an identity tag which one of the victims would have been wearing when he was killed. Now that tag has this year gone back to America and has been handed over to his family, which brings such joy to me. It really does. It's theirs, it's not ours. And we have a guy in America who's done a lot of research on this crash. His uncle was killed, no, his great uncle, I beg your pardon, was killed in it. And he actually found pictures of 30 of the 31 victims, which takes a lot of doing, it really does. And we've got the photographs on display there. There's just one guy who has escaped so far, but I am hopeful that one day we will find him. And we've got a signet ring, and that's a story in itself. That was found on the crash site in 2 parts. It was flattened. And it had initials on it in the year 1937. The initials were EM. Nobody on that flight had the initials EM, so this really stumped me. We got several people, victims with, I think 3 of them with a surname beginning with the letter M. So I tried researching these guys, but I couldn't link them to the ring. Anyway, I had emailed to me a photograph of one of the victims, a guy called Lawrence McGeehee. And it was a 3/4 length portrait. He was standing and he had his arms crossed, something like this. And I could see a ring on his finger, a signet ring, and it looked awfully like the one we'd got. So by return of email, I got in touch with the guy in America who'd sent it and said, can you do me a high resolution scan of that hand? And he did, and it was the ring. We got his ring, and that is going back to his family. And that was a real result. It was amazing. And it's just so wonderful. The last memorial we did, we put this up, and it says on the bottom, just to help me, 2012. This was another B-17 flying fortress that crashed at the Chasms in 1945, just about 12 days before the other one. 11 people died on that, and it was on the, I can't work out what anniversary it was, but we got a number of people over from the States at the unveiling of this crash. And again, we've made a lot of friends in the States because of that event. And we've done our bit for tourism as well, because one of the guys was a tour guide in California, and he brought about 40 Americans with him one year. And apart from losing the luggage between Dublin and the Isle of Man, it was a great success. Yeah, I won't go into that. Right, so in 2014, we decided we ought to build a garden. We'd got this patch of derelict land round the back of the museum. And when I was doing my fundraising in 2000, the Canadian Air Force very generously sent us $1,000 Canadian, which I think was about £500 at the time. And we decided to ring fence that for a special Canadian memorial. And indeed, after 14 long years, we actually got to do it, and hopefully I've got a picture of it. There we are. That was unveiled in 2014 by the Canadian Air Attaché. And we do get quite a lot of Canadian people coming to see it, which is rather pleasant. And then a couple of years ago, we had another memorial erected in the garden to 11 Polish airmen who died in crashes on the Isle of Man. And when I saw this photograph, I've got to admit, my eyes filled up, and it still makes me quite emotional, because that guy, Michał Sprengler, he was a colonel in the Polish army, currently in the Polish army. He's been promoted since. He was based in London, but that just says it all. It's the respect of one serviceman to his fallen comrades. It gets me, it really does. So 2018, and we opened our First World War exhibition. I started planning this in 2012, fully intending to open it in 2014 for the centenary of the start of the Great War. Didn't work. I sent a news release out on the island. If you've got any Manx-related World War I stuff, can we borrow it or have it? And I was absolutely inundated with material. It was amazing what came in. And it took me literally 5 years to get it all catalogued and described and researched. And this was the end result. And I've got to say, it has proved to be rather a success. It's black, the whole building's black because it's a black subject. And it also makes it easier to photograph, because we did learn with the first Nissen where it's painted silver, all the reflection in the glass really spoils your pictures. But it has proved to be a major, major success. And we go into it in quite a lot of detail, but it's the personal stories that people like. Obviously, the people in the stories are no longer with us. Many of them were casualties. And we sent 8,000 people to war in the First World War. And of those, 1,300 didn't come home. Everyone's named in there in alphabetical order. And we do get people coming in and saying, there's my great uncle, there's my granddad. It's good. I've enjoyed it anyway. With loads of medals. This one was issued posthumously, I've got to say, to Lance Sergeant William Clucas, a Douglas lad. He was the first casualty from the Isle of Man in the First World War. Since we got that, and the story behind this was found outside a house in Ramsey in the dirt. It was being cleared. somebody had dropped this and it had been trodden into the mud, and somebody who recognised it picked it up, identified it and brought it into us, which was rather nice. One of his other World War I medals is with us, and that was found at the auction, the local auctions. So we're still missing his death plaque, the big widow's penny, and his third medal. But one day, you never know, they might turn up. So he's the first casualty. We haven't got the last casualty, but Robert Quayle died on the 9th of November 1918. He died of wounds which he suffered the previous day, so he died in hospital. The really tragically sad thing about this is news of his death wouldn't have got home to his mother before news of the armistice on the 11th of November. So she would be thanking God that her son would be coming home. She was a widow, she'd got no other family. It didn't happen. He was dead in France. And we've a lot of stories about these guys. Now this one, we hear about war crimes, and these three Manx lads are victims of a war crime. They were all merchant seamen on a ship called the Belgian Prince, and she was carrying a mixed cargo over to America, I believe, from South Wales, and she was torpedoed off the north coast of Ireland. She was sinking, all the crew survived the attack, and they took to the lifeboats. The German submarine came to the surface, and the guys in the lifeboats paddled over to it. They got onto the deck of the submarine, at which point several crew members of the submarine jumped into the lifeboats and started putting their axes through the bottom to sink them. They took the protective gear and their overcoats from the crew. The German crew got back in the U-boat and then they submerged, leaving these guys floundering in the water. 3 men survived. None of these survived. 3 men survived and were picked up a long time later by an American destroyer, and they were able to tell the story of what had happened. Now, of these 3 men, they all vanished without a trace. A few bodies were washed up, some in Ireland, some in Scotland. And the guy in the middle, Tom McGrattan, his body was washed up on the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, which some of you may know. It's quite a remote part of Scotland, very close to the Isle of Mull. No roads in that area, so all the inter-village transport effectively was by small boat. And Tom's body was washed up about 3 months after the event on the coast of Scotland. Remarkably, he was identified because he had his seaman's pocketbook in his pocket, and that was sent back home to Castletown, to the police station. Don't know what happened to it after that, whether it was given to his widow or whether the police kept it because maybe they thought, you know, it was a bit too close to him or something. I don't know. Anyway, it's vanished over the years. What we don't know is what happened to Tom's body. Obviously, his body was there on the beach on Ardnamurchan, but he's not in a grave. I did lots of research on this trying to find him because I know he wasn't listed by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, whereas at least one of his comrades is, who was washed up on the coast of Scotland somewhere else. He's in a war grave. But Tom isn't mentioned on the Commonwealth War Graves website at all. So I got in touch with historical associations on Mull, because the nearest cemetery to where he was washed up is actually on the Isle of Mull at Tobermory. They drew a blank. No, we've got no unidentified seamen buried here. We've got no identified seamen buried here. Similarly, on Ardnamurchan, they did say there is a little cemetery which hadn't been used for about 100 years, very close to where he was washed up. He may have been put in there, but I tend to favour the idea that with it being a maritime community, his body was taken back out to sea and buried at sea. We'll never know. I was hoping we might find him, but I'm sure wherever he is at peace. Maybe not. It was a war crime. And the captain of the U-boat did it again. He did the same thing on 2 occasions. And to crown it all, he actually sank a hospital ship. Not a nice guy. At the end of the war, he knew what was coming to him if he was captured, so he fled to South America. Now, I thought this was a Second World War Nazi kind of thing, the South American connection, but it wasn't. This guy went to South America, stayed there until Hitler came into power, and then he moved back to Germany and became quite a high-ranking officer in the SS, so you can tell what a nice guy he was, really. And I don't often say this, but God, I hope he rots in hell. So 2018 again, we opened the Royal Air Force exhibition to celebrate 100 years of the Royal Air Force. There's always been links between the Isle of Man and the Air Force, either people from the island in the RAF or the RAF having a presence here. So we have a couple of pictures. No, we haven't. Then we go on to our real genuine aeroplane of World War II vintage. The picture at the top is, and I hope I've got this right. Yeah, so the picture at the top shows it when it was at the factory. It's the picture, the aeroplane nearest the camera. You'll notice the number 9019 on the side. After the war, it was sold off to a farmer in Canada, and these guys using the metal for repairing sheds. They used the fuel tanks for storing liquids. The wheels went onto farm trailers. Waste not, want not. This one actually stayed more or less intact, not in one piece, it had all been dismantled, but it was in bits, and the front section of it was sent to us by a museum in Canada. We restored it, and that's a finished object, and we're being helped by the army cadets there who helped to get it in situ in the museum. And to my disgust, I haven't included a picture of it in the museum, but that's the interior of it. That's as far as we've got so far. There are a few more instruments to go in there, but it is very much as it was in 1941 when it was built. And it is so claustrophobic in there. And you imagine, it's claustrophobic for me just wearing overalls, but imagine the people flying it were wearing thick sheepskin clothing to keep themselves warm, and there's just no room to jump around. But you know, it's a warplane, you don't need to jump around. This is one of the stories that nobody knows about, and I was talking to somebody earlier about Bletchley Park. Now, the radio operators who picked up enemy coded signals to be sent to Bletchley Park for decoding were all trained on the Isle of Man, on Douglas Prom. It was called the Special Operators Training Battalion. I don't know how they come up with these imaginative titles, but they do. And most of the people who were trained were women. And you can see on the bottom picture there, I think that's is that Summerhill Glen with 2 cannons? That's a picture of some of the ladies having a few hours off. And the radio receiver at the top is the bit of equipment that they would use to pick up the enemy coded signals. They didn't know why they were picking them up. They got no idea. All they did was jot them down, send them, pass them on to somebody who would identify whether they were important or not, and the important ones would go to Bletchley Park. So we hear a lot about Bletchley Park these days, but what we don't hear about is the Manx link, and we should. Well, you do if you come to the museum. Stuff comes in on a regular basis. Now, the thing at the top obviously has got absolutely no link to the Isle of Man, but it's such a wonderful story. Up to the 1970s, if you drove the highways and byways of Britain, you would see these red and blue signs pointing to the local airfield. But in the middle of the 1970s, the IRA was perceived as being a bit of a threat to these airfields by the Royal Air Force, and they decreed that all these signposts should be taken down so the IRA wouldn't be able to find the airfields. You know, this is how they work in the RAF. I mean, ex-RAF here, I'm safe with HE. Oh, sorry guys, but yeah. But yeah, so one of our members, is deceased now, I'm afraid, but he drove a 3-ton truck for the Royal Air Force, and he was dispatched with a group of colleagues to take all these signs down. And he was based at Linton-on-Ouse, and he couldn't bear to take this to the scrapyard with the rest. So he posted it home to his brother to look after. And it's virtually a unique survivor because nearly everyone went for scrap. So that was one of the daft objects. But I couldn't turn it away. After Andy had died, his brother brought it to us, and it's just wonderful. And it's a bit of a memorial to Andy. The bottom left object you probably recognise as a hand grenade. Fortunately, that is just a raw casting. It's not been made into a proper grenade. And I dread the day when somebody comes into the museum with a live one, because explosives and airfields don't go together very well at all. So hopefully it'll never happen. But we do get weapons brought in, always deactivated, thankfully. The strange thing on the right-hand side is our oldest aviation artefact. It looks like a bit off a vintage motorbike, but it's actually the control column from a First World War SE-5A fighter. And that was the first aeroplane to crash on the Isle of Man. At least I'm saying it was. It is probably the first aeroplane to crash on the Isle of Man. That control column has been sewn off an aeroplane. Now, the aeroplane that crashed had been pinched by a chap in the Royal Air Force. He was under arrest for low flying. He was based in Chester. He pinched this SE-5 with the intention of flying to Southern Ireland to visit some friends. He somehow lost his way. All you do is head west and you get to the island, to Ireland. But he landed at King William's College in the Fields, and he asked no doubt very puzzled groundsman, which way is Ireland? You know? And this guy probably had never seen an aeroplane before. Oh, that way, probably. You know? Anyway, he took off and he started showing off because he was a bit like that. Although he was an ace, he'd shot down 9 enemy aircraft, so he hadn't done bad. But he was showing off a bit doing aerobatics, and his engine cut out, so he had to glide back down to earth. And as he landed, his wheels went into a ditch in the fields, and the airplane flipped over on its back. He wasn't badly hurt, although we've got a wonderful picture of him with the biggest sticking plaster on his nose. It's like a comedy thing. The aeroplane was smashed to bits. It was put under guard overnight. This happened on a Saturday. By Sunday morning, there was virtually nothing left. People had been from far and wide to pinch bits from this thing. I think the engine block was left, but everything else had gone. And I love to think that this control stick is actually from that actual aircraft. It certainly wasn't another one ever came to the Isle of Man. So on the balance of probabilities, I think we'll say it came from that. Now, one of the mystery pictures, and I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I will wind up if somebody gives me the signal. But I do want to tell you this story. I had a very open mind about the paranormal. And being in a museum, you get all these daft films about mummies coming to life and all this rubbish. And from time to time, we get groups of paranormal investigators coming to the museum, and they have a lovely time. They scare themselves witless, trying to communicate with the spirits, and they don't. You know, they just... But they give us money to do it, so we're tarts. We don't mind. We'll take money from anybody. So yeah, these groups come round. Now this picture came to us from Colby British Legion Club when it was closing. They were disposing of everything, and very kindly they gave us all these objects which had been hung on the walls since time immemorial. And this young fella is in the uniform of the Isle of Man Volunteers, which was a fairly short-lived unit at the start of the First World War. By early 1915, they'd all been absorbed into the King's Liverpool Regiment, but his cap badge is definitely Isle of Man Volunteers. Very helpfully, there's a name on the back of the picture, because we didn't know who he was, and the name, which I can't remember, I think it was Kenyak or something like that, so I thought, well, that's got to be his name. And the only reason that you would have a hand-coloured portrait of your lad from the First World War is if he didn't come home, so that pretty much guarantees that he was a casualty. So I looked through my casualty lists, and there were 2 possible candidates named Kenyak in the Isle of Man Volunteers. Anyway, I managed to narrow it down to one who became my favourite, and I did a little biography of him and attached it to the picture which we had on display. And it was just literally stuck on with a piece of blue tack, just stuck onto the glass at the front of on the frame. And it kept falling off. And you go mad after a while running a museum. You talk to your exhibits, you know. And I ended up talking to this lad saying, what are you doing? Why do you keep knocking that off? Stick it back on with blue tack. And I eventually made a very fancy wire hook, welded to the back of the card that this information was on, and hooked over the top of the picture. And this went on over a period of months when it kept falling off. And eventually this thing didn't fall off. Got you. Until we had a paranormal evening. And they always say, have you ever experienced anything odd? And I said, well, not really. No, I said, there is one thing, but I'm not going to tell you about it. I said, you've got to find it, basically. And I was chatting to a group of them very close to this. And there was a girl opposite me. She had her back to this picture. And we were just chatting, and she shuddered. She said, oh, somebody's just run the hand over the back of my head. I thought, yeah, of course they have, yeah. Anyway, and by this stage, every time I opened the museum or closed it, I checked that this label was in place. It was like a reflex action. And it had been there, it must have been static for 6 or 8 months, never moved. Anyway, they did all their silly mumbo-jumbo, and they went away trembling with fear. I went away trembling with cold, because they always come in the depths of winter, and the heating's not very effective. And on me closing down operations, I looked at this thing and the pictures, the label was on the floor. Well, talk about the hair standing up on the back of your neck. But by this time I was quite blasé because I was having a conversation with him. You've done it again, haven't you? You've done it again. But I really did decide then that I must have given him the wrong name. So the following Sunday morning, I got all my, well, it's on the laptop, I've got photographs of a lot of the First World War casualties. And I went through them all, they're all in alphabetical order, and I got to the T's, the letter T's. And that black and white picture on the left is in the Isle of Man yearbook for 1918. Got the wrong man. It's not Kennick at all, it's Will Taylor, a young fella from Santon. So that very morning, I'd got his biographical details ready. I reprinted the label. I stuck it on the front of the glass with blue tack, and it has not moved from that day to this. Make that what you will. We've gone a bit arty. We expanded into artwork. These are etchings by a chap called Michael Sandel, who is an artist and sculptor of international fame. So I was told. I must admit I'd never heard of the guy, but he did grow up on the Isle of Man, and he is indeed an internationally renowned artist. And he offered us these 4 prints. Well, we couldn't turn them down. It's a diversion for the museum, really, and hopefully the first of many new things. Quickly behind the scenes, that's our storeroom on a good day. If you open the door now, it's just a sea. You can't get in at all. It's desperate, it really is. We desperately need more room. There's stuff like that in the storeroom, lots of paperwork. It's environmentally controlled, so nothing's going to deteriorate while it's in our care. This is another mystery picture found at the tip at Point of Ayre. We don't know who he is. We know what regiment he was in. There were 2 Manx casualties in that regiment. His chances are he is one or other of them, but I don't have another picture of either of the guys to sort of work out who he is. One day, hopefully we will. And then we get wonderful things like this, photograph albums from First World War and Second World War. These were taken by or for a member of the Manx regiment who was captured on the island of Crete. And these photographs are absolutely amazing. I forget which prison camp he was in, but they show camp life. The top right is a secret radio, which we've actually got in the museum, and that is virtually a unique survivor. The Imperial War Museum have got one, but I'm told it's no longer on display. I may be wrong. But a lad from Onken built that, and he kept it concealed in that tree stump, which they used as a seat in the barrack room. When the Germans came in to look for contraband, somebody sat on it, nonchalantly smoking a pipe or whatever, and it was never tapped to see if it was hollow. And then at the bottom 2 pictures are when they were liberated by the Americans. You can see them rushing towards a very overloaded jeep on the left there. But there are some other pictures from this collection, which I don't think I've included here, but they're a bit grim. They show Russian prisoners of war, and they are literally skeletons in rags. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see them. The Nazis treated them so appallingly badly. And the Allied prisoners, if they possibly could, would throw food to them and things just to keep them going. That's the railway crossing in Ballasalla, would you believe, in 1945. The aeroplane being towed behind a tractor had been on display as a sort of victory celebration in Douglas on the promenade. Unique to us, that picture. We've got the original. And then I go to great pains to not have Nazi emblems on display. And here's our cat acting as a censor. Well, our late cat, Maisie, much loved and much missed. You know what cats do? If you've got a box, they have to sit in it. If you've got a flag or any piece of paper on the floor, the cat lands on it. So there's old Mace showing her disapproval of the Nazi symbol. We've recently acquired a number of gallantry medals from the First World War, all military medals, which is the one on the left there with the red and white and blue stripe. Unfortunately, the records, the reasons why these medals were issued have been lost. The records were destroyed. And we don't know why James Skillicorn was awarded the military medal, or any of the other 5 guys that we've got with military medals. Very frustrating. He must have done something very special. They were all brave guys, whether they got medals or not. And then we get the very poignant objects. The gun, the rifle, excuse me, at the bottom is a short magazine Lee Enfield, which was a standard British rifle in the First World War and the early days of the Second World War. The rusty relic at the top is exactly the same weapon after many years underground on the Western Front. That was brought back in the 1970s to the island. It doesn't have a Manx connection particularly, other than it's been here most of its life. But it just shows, you know, the devastation of the First World War. The thing's bent like a banana. It's actually cocked and ready to fire. So the poor soul who was carrying that was ready for action when presumably he lost his life. He certainly lost his rifle. And just to hold it, it takes you back more than 100 years and think, who was he? What would he have done if he'd lived? A happier subject. The aeroplane, that was opened early this year to great acclaim, and lots of people have been on it and enjoyed sitting in it and reminiscing about Manx Islands. That's what the cockpit looked like when we got it. Not very inspiring. There's not even a floor in the thing. So that's after I was set loose with a box of bits and not even an instruction book. But if you can restore Land Rovers, you can restore aeroplanes, believe me. And remarkably, you only need 3 different spanners to build an ATP. You're struggling if you lose one of them, but yeah, that's what the cabin looked like. It had just been stripped as an empty shell and used as a freighter aeroplane. But after a couple of months' work, it started to look like that. They even put lighting in it. And then it looks like that now. That was taken on Saturday evening. We had a group from Russian Rotary had afternoon tea on the aeroplane. That's the first time it's had passengers on it since 2000. It was converted into a freighter in 2000, so that was quite nice. 55 of them. Which was quite an impressive haul of people. The only drawback is it made the suspension on the aeroplane sag, and we couldn't open the back door the following day, so I've got to get that pumped up. But these things are sent to triers, and we put pretty lights on the tail as well, but I noticed the other day that the battery's gone, so I'll have to fix that. Right, TripAdvisor, now I'm blowing the trumpet now. There's a website called TripAdvisor where people can put reviews of hotels, restaurants, museums or whatever. We are the top-rated heritage attraction on the Isle of Man. It shows number 4 there, Manx Aviation Military Museum. The top 3 of all the things to do on the Isle of Man are things like laser mayhem, trike tours, rubbish like that. We're the top heritage attraction, and that gives me such pleasure. Not that I'm competitive. And this very day, the Post Office have launched a set of stamps. It's Battle of Britain Day today, and in conjunction with their Battle of Britain issue, they've done 6 stamps covering 25 years of the museum. So that really means you've made it, doesn't it, when you've got your name on a stamp? Just to finish off, future plans. Now, these objects came in, when did they come in? On Saturday. These bits were fished up from the bottom of the Irish Sea in about 1971 by a fishing boat. In very poor condition, but they are actually bits of a German bomber. The thing on the left is a fuel pump that was attached to a sort of drop tank under the aircraft. The 2 signs on the right are only tiny little things you can see from the dimension there in millimetres. They're bits of a bomb site. So we know it was a bomber. From the model of the bomb site, we know it was a Junkers 88. After that, we can't go anywhere. We know that thing was built in 1942, so we know it's mid to late war. But that means this was found 14 miles south of Port St Mary. So that means probably that 4 German aviators came to grief 14 miles south of Port St Mary. We do remember them. We can't remember them by name. But we are intending in the future, where next, to build or erect a sculpture in the museum grounds. It's effectively a memorial to the missing, because quite a number of aviators have taken off from the island's airfields, never to be seen again. Their aircraft have come down in the sea and they've been lost without trace. And those 4 German guys come into that category, I suppose, because they were lost in our waters. The idea is it's the basic outline of an angel with the wings, but there's a sort of humanoid void in the middle, symbolising the missing. The upraised arm, farewell, and there'll be 3 birds springing out of the arm, meaning freedom, departure, whatever you want it to mean, really. We are trying to raise funds for that, so if anybody wins the lottery, please let me know. We did apply to the Arts Council for funding, but they're proving difficult, shall we say. We will get there. We're looking at around about £40,000. We can cover half of it, but we can't afford the full thing. But we'll get there one day. And then the other future plan is to take the front end of this aeroplane, because this was the last passenger ATP in existence. This is where I got all the interior from for our ATP. That's looking very sad now at Ronald's Way. We're going to cut the front off it from the wing right to the nose, and we're going to literally bolt it to the museum to create a new exhibition space, and that will allow me to extend our civil aviation exhibition, and hopefully it'll happen within the next 12 months, provided I am spared. And I think that's it. So 25 years ago, somebody said that, and I think we've proved them wrong. I do hope so. Thank you.